He's one of the most famous faces on earth. And yesterday at Horse Guards Parade, Cristiano Ronaldo tried to do what millions have failed to, make a royal guard laugh. But this time, something different happened. Why did the guards stay completely still, even when Ronaldo pulled out all the stops? And what quiet gesture, just seconds later, stopped the entire crowd in their tracks? Watch closely, because this moment didn't end the way anyone expected. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. There's something about Horse Guards Parade in the summer, how the light bounces off the white stone, how the air thrums with expectation long before the ceremonial boots strike the ground. But that morning, it was different. The usual trickle of tourists had swelled into a sea, families pressed to the rope lines, children on shoulders, camera lenses trained with military precision. Even the officers had noticed the difference in energy. Rumours had been swirling for days, but this was the first time they seemed close to true. Cristiano Ronaldo was in London, and word had it he'd be stopping by. Lance Corporal Callum Reev stood sentry, unmoving beneath the weight of his bearskin and the pounding sun. At 33, he'd spent the better part of a decade in the Coldstream Guards, long enough to carry the weight of tradition, longer still to understand the meaning of silence. He didn't flinch when children shouted, when grown men cracked jokes, or when phones hovered inches from his face. He was, as one officer once put it, unreadable even under threat of death. His stillness wasn't just duty, it was inheritance. Callum's father, Richard Reev, had served in Berlin during the Cold War. He wasn't a talker, wasn't emotional, but there were things he said often enough to etch into memory. Chief among them, stillness is a form of speech, and sometimes it's the loudest one. Richard had passed 5 years ago, a heart attack in his garden, quick, silent, just like him. Callum hadn't spoken much at the funeral, but when the bearers lowered the casket, he'd stood at attention for the full 10-minute tribute, without a blink, without a breath, out of rhythm. His mother cried that day, not because he didn't say anything, but because she knew he had. And now, here he was, still standing, still silent. And today, as the whispers thickened and heads turned toward the gate, he braced for the strange storm headed his way. Ronaldo didn't arrive like a hurricane, more like a wave, rolling in, dressed casually but crisp. Sunglasses perched above familiar cheekbones, walking with the ease of someone who'd done this all his life. There were no paparazzi, no press crews, just a tight circle of handlers, one personal videographer, and his young son, who clung to his hand and pointed excitedly at the guards like they were superheroes. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That's really him! Look! Look! Is that Cristiano Ronaldo? He's taller than I thought!" Phones rose like salutes. Some started filming before he'd even stopped walking. And when he did stop, it was right in front of Lance Corporal Reev. The crowd surged behind him, careful not to cross the ropes. But the energy shifted. Laughs gave way to held breaths. The kind of collective pause that comes before something begins. Ronaldo turned to his son, said something in Portuguese, and the boy nodded, grinning. Then Ronaldo looked directly at the royal guard, smiled, and stepped forward. Ronaldo leaned casually on the rope barrier, adjusting his sunglasses as he surveyed the uniformed figure in front of him. Lance Corporal Callum Reev didn't move. Not a twitch, not a blink. "Let's see if British guards are as serious as they say," Ronaldo said with a grin, his accent smooth, voice raised just enough for the crowd to hear. Some chuckled. A few tourists lifted their phones higher, sensing something was about to happen. One teenage girl giggled and whispered, "He's actually going to try." And he did. Ronaldo took a small step sideways and raised an eyebrow, studying Reev like a coach reading an opponent. Then he made his first move, pulling a face. It was subtle at first, then exaggerated. Puffed cheeks, crossed eyes, tongue-out nonsense that would have broken most kindergarten classrooms. Nothing. Reev's posture remained a study in discipline. Chin up, shoulders squared, chin strap tight against the line of his jaw. Undeterred, Ronaldo tried again. He began speaking in rapid Portuguese, switching from gibberish to jokes. Something about how his son could hold a better posture. Something about needing to recruit him for the next World Cup, if he could stay this still under pressure. A few people laughed. Reev's jaw stayed locked. Then Ronaldo stepped back, dropped into a playful crouch, and executed a quick foot roll, his trademark step-over move. It was fast, clean, and clearly just for show. The crowd roared with delight, and his son squealed with laughter. Ronaldo turned toward Reev, arms wide, like a magician expecting applause. "Come on," he said, smiling, "not even a blink." The crowd loved it, but Reev, unmoved. Then, just barely, his eyes shifted. It wasn't much, just the faintest flicker downward. But it didn't go unnoticed. Ronaldo's son was mimicking him now, wobbling side to side, attempting a clumsy step-over of his own. His giggles were pure, untouched by the showmanship surrounding him. And Reev had noticed it. He hadn't broken character, but in that fraction of a second, less than a breath, he had seen the boy. Not the cameras, not the footballer, just the boy. A little girl nearby tugged on her father's sleeve and asked, "Daddy, why won't the soldier laugh?" Her father, still filming, lowered his phone and looked at the guard with something approaching reverence. "Because that's real discipline, sweetheart." Even Ronaldo heard it. He glanced sideways at the man, then back at Reev. His smile faltered just slightly, not out of offence but understanding. The mood in the crowd shifted. Laughter gave way to curiosity. People weren't filming for jokes anymore. They were filming for the moment, waiting to see if the statue would ever move. Ronaldo leaned closer, less showman now, more man. "You're good, my friend," he said quietly. "Very good." Reev didn't respond, but his silence spoke louder than any words could. Not everyone in Ronaldo's entourage shared his restraint. One of the crew, tall, square-jawed, sunglasses perched too high, stepped forward with the swagger of someone who thought he was part of the main act. He laughed, nudged Ronaldo playfully, and called out in a broad accent that didn't match the country he claimed allegiance to. "Come on, mate, he's just having a laugh. Give us a smile, just a little one." A few people laughed, nervously this time. The tone had shifted. Lance Corporal Reev stood unmoved. But the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't amused, it was cautious, watchful. Someone in the crowd, an older man in a tweed cap, leaning on a cane, called out from near the railing. His voice was gravelled with age, but it carried the kind of quiet authority you don't learn in school. "He's not paid to entertain you, lad. He's there to stand." The man's wife placed a hand on his arm, but he didn't back down. Some things still mean something, even if you've forgotten what. More heads turned now, not toward the guard, but toward Ronaldo and his crew. The crew member rolled his eyes and muttered, "Bit stiff, this place." But Ronaldo, he knew. He heard the shift in energy. He felt the crowd pulling away from amusement, tipping toward discomfort. He raised his hands, palms out, the universal sign of retreat. "Respect," he said simply. "My friend, respect." Then to his son, he added in Portuguese, "He's not playing. He's working. We don't distract people who are working." The boy nodded, looking up at the guard now with more awe than mischief. Reev didn't move. He didn't acknowledge the correction, but something in the air seemed to settle, like a flag folding itself respectfully in the wind. The crowd quieted again, not the hush of a joke ending, but the silence of something deeper settling in. Behind the first wave of tourists, a young woman in a bright blue tour guide uniform leaned toward a group of schoolchildren. Her voice was soft, but clear enough for the nearest adults to hear. "That guard isn't ignoring him," she said. "He's standing for something." A few of the children looked puzzled. One boy whispered, "Standing for what?" The guide just smiled faintly. "For all of us." Reev blinked once, slowly, controlled, not a reaction, just the human eye doing what it must. But the effect was enough. In a sea of breathless observers, even a blink felt monumental. Somewhere behind him, a pigeon fluttered upward, its wings startlingly loud in the quiet. Phones stayed raised, but hands were steadier now, less frantic. A woman lowered her camera entirely, placing a hand to her chest instead. And Ronaldo? He didn't try again, not this time. He stood beside his son quietly, watching the man in red wool and white leather remain frozen in the face of the world's attention, and understanding, perhaps for the first time, that the silence wasn't coldness. It was something else, a kind of strength that doesn't move. Cristiano Ronaldo crouched beside his son, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder as the murmurs behind them settled into reverent quiet. The energy had shifted entirely now. No more mockery, no more challenges. Just a kind of collective pause, like everyone was waiting for something they couldn't name. The boy looked up at his father, confused by the stillness. unsure whether they were still playing a game or had stumbled into something else entirely. Ronaldo leaned in, whispered something in Portuguese. The boy nodded, reached into the side pouch of his small backpack and pulled out a folded cloth. It was a small Portugal flag, lightweight, no bigger than a placemat, likely brought along as a souvenir or lucky token. Ronaldo gently took it, smoothed it in his hands, then knelt and pressed it into his son's palms. "Go," he whispered. "Show it to him." The boy looked uncertain, then gathered his courage and stepped forward, past his father, past the handlers and staff until he reached the rope line. He didn't say a word. He didn't giggle or wave. He simply stood there, tiny fingers clutching the edge of the flag, holding it up toward the towering guard who hadn't spoken once since this all began. The crowd collectively held its breath. Lance Corporal Callum Reev remained motionless for a long moment, so long that people began to wonder if he'd seen the boy at all. And then, slowly, with movements so controlled they might have been mechanical, he shifted, not a step, not a break in posture, but his eyes, those sharp, silent, focused eyes, lowered, deliberately, purposefully, until they met the boy's. There it was, a nod. Tiny, barely more than a bow of the chin, but unmistakable. A gesture with the weight of history behind it, a single act that said everything the uniform never could. Gasps echoed across the crowd, audible, raw. A few phones dropped to sides. Some didn't even notice they'd stopped recording. Near the front, a woman clutched her mouth, tears streaming down her face, as if the moment had unlocked something she'd been holding back for years. The boy beamed, wide-eyed and proud, turning toward his father with a grin that split his face in two. Ronaldo placed his hand over his chest and bowed his head slightly toward the guard. Not a smirk, not a camera-ready grin. Just quiet acknowledgement, man to man. Reev's eyes lifted again, back to the middle distance, back to the ceremonial stare that had seen off generations of foreign dignitaries, hecklers and storms. But the moment had passed through him, and something had changed in its wake. A child nearby whispered to her mother, "Did the soldier just move?" "Yes, love," the woman replied, "but only for something important." Ronaldo crouched again beside his son, pulling him close and murmuring something softly no one else could hear. Behind them, the crowd shifted, quietly, carefully. No one was jeering now. No one dared. They weren't watching a performance anymore. They were bearing witness. As the boy returned to his father, flag still in hand, a hush lingered in the air, thicker than the heat of the day. A reverence, unspoken but shared. And somewhere beyond the rope, a single man in red wool and stillness had reminded them all that silence, when chosen, can be louder than applause. The moment passed, as all moments must. Cristiano Ronaldo gently took his son's hand and began to guide him away from the rope. They didn't rush. They didn't wave. There were no final jokes, no dramatic exits, just a quiet, respectful retreat through a sea of strangers who had fallen oddly silent in their presence. The handlers followed, subdued. Even the brash crew member from earlier now walked with his sunglasses tucked into his shirt and his head lowered. No one dared speak above a murmur. And yet, something lingered behind them, a feeling and a shift. People who had come looking for a laugh now found themselves standing straighter. The air felt different, less like a tourist attraction, more like a service, as though they'd stumbled into a moment that didn't belong to them but had somehow included them anyway. A little girl mimicked the guard's posture, hands flat at her sides, face serious. Her younger brother tried to do the same, legs wobbling from the effort. Their father knelt to whisper, "He didn't laugh because he didn't need to." And still, Lance Corporal Callum Reeves stood, motionless, measured, calm. The tourists didn't disperse the way they normally did after a ceremony. They lingered, drawn not by entertainment, but by the gravity of something they hadn't expected to feel. Back inside the restricted zone behind the archway, Captain Dalton stood with his arms folded, watching the last of the visitors drift toward the gift shop. He waited until the changing rotation brought Reev off post. Reev approached with the same precision he always did, each step precise, each turn measured. He stood before his commanding officer, bare skin tucked under his arm, face slick with sweat, but unreadable as ever. Dalton gave him a long look before speaking. "That footage is already making the rounds." Reev didn't respond. "Protocol says no unsanctioned movement," Dalton continued, "not even a nod." "Yes, sir." There was a pause, then Dalton's tone softened. "But between us?" Reev finally looked up. "That wasn't protocol," Dalton said, "but it was right." Reev held his captain's gaze, expression still calm. "It wasn't for him," he said quietly. "It was for the boy." Dalton nodded once, hands still tucked behind his back. "I know." Another beat of silence passed between them. Then Dalton added, "You reminded them what standing means." Reev gave the smallest possible nod, just enough to acknowledge the words, not enough to draw attention if anyone were watching. Dalton turned to go, but paused after a few steps. "Reev." "Sir?" Dalton looked back, a rare trace of warmth in his voice. "Hell of a thing you did today." Reev didn't answer. He simply placed his bearskin back on, with steady hands, adjusted the strap across his chin, and walked out of the archway to resume his next rotation. Outside, the crowd had thinned, but the reverence hadn't. People still stood in quiet groups, speaking in hushed tones, retelling the story to those who'd missed it. He nodded, someone whispered, just once, to the boy with the flag. Others just stood, staring at the same spot, as though hoping the stillness might move them too. And in the middle of it all, Callum Reev took his post once more, unmoved and unforgettable. Back at Wellington Barracks, the buzz reached the locker room before Reev did. It wasn't loud, just murmurs, glances, the occasional nudge between boots being unlaced or jackets hung up. Everyone had heard, most had seen. The footage had already spread through group chats faster than a paper-aid rumour. By the time Lance Corporal Callum Reev stepped inside, the room fell into a kind of respectful quiet. No teasing, no remarks. Just the quiet shuffle of uniformed men making space. He removed his bearskin with quiet precision, placed it gently on its shelf, unclipped his belt, peeled off the scarlet tunic, stiff with heat and stillness, folded it perfectly over the bench like it was part of a sacred rite. Across the room, a younger guard, Private Bennett, looked up from lacing his boots. Bennett was fresh, maybe 20, still carried that wide-eyed energy of someone who hadn't yet seen what silence was really for. He cleared his throat. Was that really Ronaldo out there then? Reev didn't glance over. Yes. There was a beat. Bennett hesitated. Did you really not feel a thing when he was trying all that stuff? Faces and jokes and foot tricks? Reev sat slowly, reaching for a towel. I felt everything. The room paused. That's why I stood still. Bennett blinked. You could almost hear the shift in how he viewed the man across the bench from him. Another guard, a corporal with 2 tours under his belt, spoke quietly from the far corner. There's already clips online, not the kind that go viral for laughs, the kind that go quiet. Reev didn't respond. Bennett rubbed the back of his neck. My mum sent it to me already. Said it made her proud, said, that's what you're training to be like, isn't it? Time all day, Reev gave something more than silence. Not a laugh, not even a full smile, just the faintest lift at the corner of his mouth. The kind of expression that lasted half a second and would have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking for it. But in a barracks full of trained eyes, they all saw it. That was the only reaction he gave them, and it was more than enough. Bennett looked down at his boots again, lacing them tighter than necessary. When he spoke next, it was softer. I didn't think one nod could do that much. Reev stood, pulling his folded tunic under his arm. "It's not about the nod," he said. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to, because everyone in that room understood exactly what he meant. The next morning, Horse Guards Parade returned to routine. There were no celebrity sightings, no clusters of press, no whispered rumours sweeping through the crowd, just the usual mix of curious tourists, tour groups gathering at the railings, and families jockeying for the perfect angle on their phones. But something was different. Not louder, quieter if anything. Near the eastern rope line, where the incident had unfolded the day before, a small group stood together, not posing, not giggling, just looking. "That's where it happened," one woman whispered to her partner, holding her phone like it was a sacred object. "Ronaldo was right here, and the guard was over there. Didn't laugh, didn't move, just stood." Her partner, a broad-shouldered man in a baseball cap, replied quietly, "He didn't laugh. But he did something better." Not far from them, a mother and son approached slowly. The boy clutched a folded piece of paper in one hand and a small Portuguese flag in the other, creased from the day before. It was the same boy. He stood just behind the rope now, his mum watching cautiously as he knelt and gently set the paper just behind the lowest post. It wasn't much, just a folded note resting on the stone, held down with a smooth pebble. In shaky handwriting it read, "Thank you for standing." Lance Corporal Callum Reev stood back at post, identical in uniform, posture and stillness to the day before. He didn't look down, didn't blink, but his eyes, trained to find stillness in chaos, briefly, ever so briefly, flickered to the folded note and then back to the middle distance. He didn't move again. He didn't need to. The moment had already been written. Behind the crowd, a woman in a tour guide vest whispered, "That's him, I think, the one from yesterday." A man beside her muttered, "Doesn't look any different." She smiled faintly. That's the point. A pair of American teenagers walked up behind the Portugal boy and his mum. One of them raised a phone and opened TikTok. "This is the one, right? The guy who nodded?" The other nodded. "Yeah, but we're not going to film it. Just wanted to see it in real life." A few paces away, a father lowered his daughter to the ground and whispered, "You see how still he is, love? That's what real focus looks like." The girl blinked, then whispered back, "He's like a mountain." And that's how they stood. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't taunt, they didn't challenge, they just watched. Some took photos, others didn't bother. And Reev, he stood with the same composure he always had. Same weight in his boots, same silence in his chest. But now when people looked at him, they didn't see a statue. They saw a man who didn't flinch when the world tried to shake him. A man who made a choice to remain still until it mattered not to him, but to someone else. And because of that, tourists still talk. Would you have tried to make the Royal Guard laugh, or stood silent in respect? Do you think Ronaldo meant harm, or was it just harmless fun that went too far? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one, and your thoughts matter more than you think. If this story moved you, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon pressed, so you never miss a new Royal Guard moment like this one. And if you know someone who still thinks these guards are just for show, share this video with them, because they might change their mind. There are more powerful stories waiting for you right now on your screen. Click one and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another story that reminds us all. Stillness. It's never empty.